Well, hello, and good morning, evening, or afternoon, depending on when you are streaming this latest episode of Edie's Susty Talk series of interviews, designed to keep us all feeling a little bit more connected as COVID carries on and we keep working remotely and flexibly. And I'm delighted to be joined today by someone that I met as I was saying off the call, one of the Economist sustainability events, I think back in 2019, when big conferences in person was still a thing, and that is Arizona Muse, who has a very long list of job titles: model, environmental activist, sustainability consultant, and newly founder of charity Dirt, which I know we'll be talking about a lot today. So how are you, Arizona?
I'm so well, and it is so nice to be doing this interview with you. It is coming full circle from the time that we met, and I've been an avid follower of Edie ever since, so it's just amazing the service that you guys do, providing such good news to us, because especially when you guys started, it wasn't easy to find at all.
No, not at all. I mean, we've been going since, the 1990s, and the conversations come on. If you think it's come on a lot in the last 2 years or so, imagine the last 21 years or so. But yes, as I was mentioning, so Arizona, we're speaking shortly after the launch of Dirt, which is this new non-profit supporting what you'd call maybe innovative farming methods, but perhaps innovative in the way that they have been done before and they're now coming back, much in the same way that refillables are an innovation in the packaging space. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about Dirt, and specifically in the release that I got about the launch, I got information about this focus on biodynamic farming. And I think that many of our readers are probably aware of regenerative or nature positive farming, but I'd love to hear as well what specifically biodynamic farming is, just to start off as well.
Absolutely. So I founded Dirt because through the journey of my activism, which has now been 6 years long, I kept coming back to soil as one of the most important things we can focus on in the face of climate change. When we regenerate soil, we are healing the earth in so many ways. Soil that is healthy is filled with trillions of living microorganisms, including bacteria, including fungal networks, and including many, many deep root systems. And right now our farming methods are generally kind of killing all the roots in soil continuously over and over and over again, several times a year, which means that those networks of microbial and fungal species down there, they can't function without the root systems because they pass each other nutrition. So that is what brought me to ask myself, if I were to start an organization, what would it be? What would it do? Mm-hmm. And the answer came really quickly: regenerate soil. And biodynamic farming is the focus of Dirt because two reasons. One reason is that biodynamics is protected by a certification called Demeter. And that's, I think, going to become really, really important, because the word regenerative could have a similar future to the word sustainable. And we all know what has happened to that word. It's a very flexible word. Anyone can use it to describe really anything. And it's not regulated. And that would be a real shame if that happened to the word regenerative as well. I hope it doesn't. But in the case that it does, biodynamics will stand really strong, because it is an incredibly difficult standard to achieve, in that it's complex, but it needs to be. It has to be complex. And once you get there, the flow is really easy after that, but the transition is a lot, and you farmers need consultants and advice in order to transition. One of the biggest myths that I would like to displace is that regenerative agriculture definitely has the potential to have higher yields than conventional agriculture. So this argument of we must feed the world, which is a horrible argument. It makes you feel so guilty. It's like, oh yeah, who am I to say that we should do something other than feed the world? If there are hungry mouths, that is the most important thing. So I think that argument really reduces us down to fear of, how do we? Whereas if you look at, first of all, what do we feed the world with? Everyone has the human right to a rich and varied diet of fruits and vegetables and meat if you choose to, not just corn and soy. Who wants to just eat corn and soy? We know those foods make you sick, especially if they're genetically modified and therefore sprayed with harmful chemicals many times a year. So this is the big scope of what DIRT is focusing on and working on, is to expand the biodynamic farming movement, because it holds so many wonderful answers to climate change on an earth, for the earth and also for humans. It's becoming part of the mandate of biodynamics to include human diversity within biodiversity, and take those two as not as being interchangeable. They come together.
That makes complete sense. I think especially given the events of the last year or so specifically, there's more of this focus on something that has to be good holistically, not just good for nature or good for climate or good for people. And those are some pretty big questions to grapple with, but I wanted to come to sort of a simple, specific one to start with, really. You mentioned a lot of different kinds of agriculture there. You mentioned fruit, vegetables, corn, soy, grains, and animal agriculture. So I wanted to get a steer on what kind of supply chains are best suited to adopt these biodynamic methods.
Every single supply chain is best suited to be using biodynamically grown raw materials, because if something on your supply chain is coming from the soil, it's your responsibility to protect it and regenerate it. Because at the moment we're in a situation where businesses have been happily profiting off the degradation of soil for the last 50 years, but really intensely for the last 40 and 30 years. So it's really time to turn that around and use business for good. And businesses are so powerful. It's immense. The quantity of materials that businesses order, even if you're a small business, compared to an individual, say. This is where the role of businesses really becomes big, is I think when you're ordering materials, raw materials. And everything can be grown biodynamically if it's a natural material. So even wood, which is a surprising one because we think wood is coming from forests, but forests, if they're not old growth rainforest, those are managed tree plantations, which are really farms. They're not forests at all. It's a single species of tree, and they've been planted with an optimal distance in between each other so that they have maximum sunlight, so they can grow as fast as possible and be harvested as quick as possible to make the most profit off of that land. This doesn't work for nature. It's really damaging on nature. And when you plant one species of plant, whether it's a tree or a grain, it will be vulnerable to pests and disease because it's not in a biodiverse situation. That means that the only answer is to spray it with chemicals to reduce the effects of pests or disease, which is harming the planet on a drastic scale. This is why we're seeing all the algae blooms in oceans, is the runoff of agricultural chemicals. So it's something that we need to stop, and biodynamics holds the answer to that, because you could manage a forest biodynamically. You can grow all the fruits and vegetables and meat that you need biodynamically. You can regenerate soil, and you can even regenerate mining scars. So all the minerals that we use for computers and tech, all the metals that we use for jewelry and even buckles and fastenings, that can all be regenerated, all those scars, by placing biodynamic regenerative farms over those scars. That also heals the communities who've been severely damaged by the mining process as well, because it's toxic, it's dangerous. Women and children do it. It's not okay. It's just not okay.
No, I think essentially from looking at my inbox and the things that I hear about, so the willingness to heal these scars, as you put it, is just coming to light. There's a recognition that restoration is no longer there's a recognition that conservation is no longer enough because of the deterioration that's already happened, that we need to go past and go to regeneration. And I wanted to get your feel on where this conversation is at, because it does seem to be growing quickly. We're getting a lot of big commitments from big businesses, small businesses. Even here in the UK, the government is looking at nature-based solutions and natural capital. But as you mentioned, there is this risk of regenerative or regeneration just becoming, a buzzword. So I wanted to get your view on where we're at. Are we at a point of just greenwashing, or are we at a proper tipping point in this conversation where we're getting some best practice and some leadership?
My opinion is strongly fashion focused. I know more about where the fashion industry is than I do about where other industries are. I do see that immense change is happening. Everyone's talking about it. There's still a lot of the changes that are happening are still a little bit old-fashioned. Like I'm seeing a lot of recycled plastic being made into polyester, which is,
Right.
of course, yes, it's better than a virgin material, but polyester is probably the worst use for recycled plastic because it sheds trillions of microfibers, and those microfibers are going straight into water systems and air systems and polluting the microorganisms who eat them, and then the larger organisms eat those, and then the bigger ones eat those, and then the flesh of all our fish and our human bodies contains microfilaments and fibers of polyester. So that's not good. And then the dye on the polyester is also really toxic, and the polyester carries that. So it's not a good solution. I think recycling plastic would be much more. Recycled plastic would be better off if it were all turned into really solid blocks and then disposed of in a very interior way, so used in walls when it's going to be covered by other materials like wood that is not leaching toxic chemicals. So the fashion industry is doing it, it's changing, but I still think that the fundamental problem is that the people in decision-making positions are the ones who have very indoor lives and don't actually get out into nature. So it's hard to understand something in the way it works if you're not in it and doing it. So my advice is to everyone in every industry and governments as well, please start seeking more advice and please heed more advice from the environmentalists. The ones who are actually out in nature need to be brought into decision-making roles because those are the people who hold the answers, and the answers are really obvious when you're in those kinds of environmentalist positions, whereas the answers are not obvious when you're in a very indoor urban position. You have to go through so much paperwork, you don't quite understand where the numbers make sense, and I've seen, just from my own little activist point of view, many climate solutions coming from big tech that they just don't make sense. They really don't. And even if we followed them, we would not solve climate change. And even the carbon issue, carbon seems to have taken front and center in the whole conversation of climate change. And even if we got down to zero carbon emissions tomorrow, we've still got climate change happening. It's not only a carbon problem, it's a lot to do with water displacement. Forests hold water on the surface of the earth. Without forests, water disperses into the atmosphere and can actually change weather patterns and can create deserts where the forests used to be, which then changes the temperature in that whole region. That is climate change. And that actually doesn't have much to do with carbon at all. So balancing the carbon in our atmosphere is one important thing that we need to do. But getting moisture rebalanced in the whole circular pattern of weather is also really, really important. And regenerative agriculture in general, particularly biodynamic farming, really holds all these answers in one solution that is almost free. Almost free. And that's what's hard to see, is that when hundreds of millions of dollars and pounds are being invested into things that may or may not work and cause a lot of emissions and environmental degradation in the lead up to them actually being functional, like big machines being built to suck carbon out of the air, for instance, is a good example of that. They're highly environmentally hard in the lead up to them actually starting to function. So that's where regenerative agriculture is just so brilliant in that sense.
I'm presuming as well that when you say that companies need to bring the environmentalists in and look, that also includes, for example, farmers and smallholders, indigenous land managers as well.
Thank you. Yes, it definitely includes different points of view than we've ever asked before. So indigenous coastal regions need to be included in the conversation around fishing permits. They don't have their fishing licenses, although they deserve to fish forever. That's their traditional right. And instead what's happened is corporations have bought those fishing licenses and fish coastal regions and freeze those fish immediately, send them inland and overfish everything to just destroy and decimate populations of fish, which this is interesting. Let's make the connection here between fish and sea life and whales and carbon. All the animals in the sea that eat plants and even plankton, because they are all actually carbon sinks, more so than trees. So we have the ocean that is totally underutilized. In fact, we are preventing the ocean from absorbing carbon by overfishing. So that is a really, really big issue of education, I think, that we need to all know this. And materials, for me, has been the biggest teaching device ever. I got really obsessed with materials from one of my mentors, Nina Morenzi, who has the sustainable angle, and she sources sustainable fabrics for the fashion industry, because until her organization, it was very difficult to find them, like prohibitively difficult to find them. And she inspired a real obsession with materials in me. And from materials, you can learn everything about the world and how it works and what has gone wrong. And even human exploitation becomes really clear when you study the path of a material along a supply chain. Because look, let's take the example of a cotton t-shirt, which I'm not wearing right now, this is linen. But a cotton t-shirt you can trace it back to a farm. And farmers were exploited, land was probably exploited. Cotton is a really difficult crop to grow, in the sense that it's a climate difficult crop to grow because it likes heat. So it's often grown in deserts, and then it needs to be irrigated. And so that water use is a really bad water use. There are some other uses of water that are not bad at all. If you're in a very moist climate and you use water and then you let it back into the environment clean, there's nothing wrong with using water, not at all. And same with land. Land use is not a bad thing, but it's been put in the bad box in a sense. And also conservation has made some mistakes historically, where conservationists have become famous for taking people off land, even people who traditionally lived there and who are no longer allowed to be there or do their ceremony there or their rituals there, in the name of protecting the land. And there was such a big misunderstanding that led to this. And the misunderstanding was that humans are bad for land. They're not. Land loves to have humans on it. The earth loves it. It's good for the environment when those humans are connected to the land, when they respect the land, and when they are helping the land to regenerate, to heal. It's a good symbiotic relationship. So land use is not necessarily bad, and water use is not necessarily bad. But going back to cotton, sorry, so you see how interesting materials are. Going back to cotton, then we can understand things like why the Aral Sea has shrunk from, like, the Aral Sea used to be like that, and now it's like that. And that was only about like 20 or 30 years, and that was cotton farming.
That's something that haunts me when people ask me about sustainable fashion. That's just, the aerial picture you get of it, and the population numbers. That's just something that always, literally haunts me.
One of the biggest climate migrations ever is that part of the world, and it's because those people have run out of water in order for us to wear t-shirts and jeans. And it's like, oh my gosh, now I see the impact of me just feeling like I'm getting a good deal and like, yay, I need another t-shirt, why not? And just no, we have to think about these decisions and these purchases so carefully. Reading the labels of garments is the most important thing we can do before we buy anything. Buying less, of course, and buying secondhand is like the greatest cheat ever, because you can buy whatever you want.
I was going to ask about the relationships here between sustainability and ethics, and specifically climate, nature and ethics, but I think we covered that nicely. And I think it's interesting to hear about how materials can be a good entry point to think about this, because I get so much news about how fashion is sort of over focusing on materials in the wrong places. So it's like, we could still make X thousand amount of shoes because they're recycled plastic, for example. So it's good to hear about this different way of coming in. And you've spoken, I think, about some of the barriers to this. So this awareness piece, a behavior change piece, and definitely a fear piece. So, won't this cost too much? Won't the yields be down? But are those the main barriers here, or is there something else as well? And how do we overcome these challenges? Because I'd like to end on a positive note.
Of course, me too. Some of the other barriers are the subsidy pathways right now. Those pathways are supporting practices that are destroying the earth and creating exploitation of humans. So one really quick thing that all governments could and please should do is to rework your subsidies. Don't take them away from the people who have them now necessarily, because of course that's not going to help a lot of people, but work with the money that you have to give and make sure it's incentivizing better practices, and not just tiny bit better practices, but a lot better practices. That was a scientific term, of course.
For sure. And I'm looking forward to seeing more about this at probably the Food Systems Summit in September, the first of its kind, which will hopefully cover, non-food ag as well to some extent.
Yeah. This is why DIRT is placing such an emphasis on everything that isn't food that comes from farms, is because I personally never used to consider that. I was aware that food came from farms, but I was not aware that anything else did. And I certainly had never said thank you to farmers for growing me my table and my chairs and my skirt and my shirt. So I think ending on a positive note would be to talk about how it is all possible. We can all do it. And through my activism, I have had the experience that my life has just gotten so much better. Now that I live a more sustainable life, I'm happier. I'm more fulfilled. I have a bigger purpose. I feel great. I have energy when I wake up in the morning because I can't wait to lead us into the future. And every single one of us has the possibility to feel like this if we start working on it. And you don't have to quit your job. It's actually great if you're going to do it within your job. Keep your job. Even if you're at a company that you're starting to judge and go, whoa, this is weird that I'm working for this company. There could be possibility for you to become a real change maker within that entity. And if not, sometimes it's great to change. I think that one thing we're going to see from COVID probably unfolding next year is that many companies have laid people off, but not because they weren't good at their jobs and not because they weren't amazing people. It was just because of COVID. So now we're going to see a whole load of professionals, highly capable, skilled professionals, become available to start either new projects, their own projects, join businesses who do have a passion for a better future. And I cannot wait to see what's going to happen.
I think that's a great note to end on. I mean, obviously we write for sustainability professionals, but so many people say, well, if we do our job properly, essentially everyone in our business needs to be a sustainability professional to some extent. So you're not just head of procurement, you're head of sustainable procurement, for example, and you're not just head of finance, you're head of sustainable finance. So I think that's the future that a lot of people are imagining. So great to end it there, Arizona. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Bye.